Good afternoon, everybody. It is the December the 15th, almost in the home stretch getting towards Christmas. There's only there's two more games. There's only one real more game left in the World Cup. For those of us who've been sitting around watching the other 78 games, how many there were. And it's THCB gang time. And I have a good full stack today, including a couple of folks we haven't seen for a while. So looking forward to this one a lot. Who do I have on today? Kim Bellard, regular THCB contributor. Rosemarie Day, our policy analyst from Day Health Strategies. Michael Millenson, patient safety expert from Health Quality Advisors. Jennifer Goldsack, who's now become a regular from the Digital Medical Society. And then a couple people who've been around about but haven't been on enough lately. Lygeia Riccardi, who's now these days the CEO of Ada Rose, consumer expert in healthcare. And Saurabh Jha, who is a radiologist from Radiologist from University of Pennsylvania. All right. Wow. That was a long one. I've had like 3 or 4 people on the last 2 times. Now we're up to 7. So good stuff. So let me start off with what people have been looking at. Yes, you can surmise that I not only went to our former producer Zoya Khan's wedding on Saturday, but I had to drive through the rain to Sacramento to get to it turned out to be a golf course, which was showing the England-France game. And then, sadly, England lost in regular time, so I wasn't late for her wedding. Otherwise, I would have to stay there for extra time. Would have been late for a wedding, which started an hour late anyway. So, yeah. But congrats to Zoya. She's having a big wedding in Houston this weekend, which our other friend Jessica Master is going to be at. And that's the gossip from the sort of THCB gang former staff. So let's hear the gossip from the current staff. So I'll start with you, Kim.
Well, congrats to Zoya, by the way. I didn't realize she was getting married, but congrats to her. So just when I thought stupid couldn't get stupider, a couple of stupid things happened. One is Ron DeSantis has this now council that's trying to take on the CDC and make sure that they're doing all the right things. And he's trying to panel grand juries to go after the drug companies for making the COVID vaccine. So really, really competing hard for those right-wing votes and anti-science. But that wasn't the stupidest thing. If you missed it, you got to watch the video of Donald Trump announcing his digital card collection, which I honestly thought it had to be a deep fake because it's so dumb that, I couldn't believe it was real. So, the bottom of the pool is getting lower and lower. So I can't wait to see what else is going to happen.
Well, I think we should all buy some. I did see a note that somebody said that if you had, because there's some competition as part of it. So you can do the thing where you can don't have to pay to enter. So if 8 million liberals flood in with mail, it'll probably break the Mar-a-Lago thing. But maybe one of them will win the lunch with him, whatever they get. I don't know. Anyway, all right, fantastic. Rose, we haven't seen you for a while. So what have you been up to? What are you watching in?
So I am still focused on what does the world look like post-Dobbs. I've been obviously watching all the election results of culminating with what happened in Georgia and seeing how much the voting was centered around abortion rights. But yesterday, the Commonwealth Fund came out with a pretty chilling report that basically said states that restrict abortion or ban or restrict abortion access have much higher maternal mortality and infant mortality rates. And like I say, it's chilling. And I was just doing a panel for the Harvard Kennedy School earlier this week with a clinician on this very topic. And he was sharing some stories, kind of from the front lines. And, this story is not over. It is far from over because it is raising people's consciousness about the fact that this is healthcare. This is lives on the line. And physicians are, deeply troubled by what's unfolding. And so I think there's just more to come on this, but this report that came out yesterday, I think really puts the data right squarely in front of us.
Yeah, I ever talked to some folks in Japan, and they actually asked me to comment about Dobbs. I was going to not talk about it because I didn't see how much it had to do with digital health in Japan. But but the point was there was a lot of regulation. The way I futzed it in is there's going to be a lot more regulation. We'll probably talk about this around some digital health tools, and there's some stuff, some new news this week about what's been going on online, and that's going to start coming. And I saw somewhere about Texas wanting to ban websites that offered abortion. About child,
right. There are so many.
There's a lot of intersection here, which is going to impact,
privacy concerns. I mean, things I hadn't even thought about, but there are apps, you know, for folks who are like tracking their health, women who are tracking their health, including like a period tracker.
Absolutely.
And so what happens to that data when, you know, you miss a period? Like, I honestly, like, it starts to be extremely dystopian and
absolutely
incredible implications.
Yeah, and we actually had Deb and McGraw was on a few months ago now. I think when Dobbs came out, it just sort of went down. You know, somebody who understands that law very, very well went down, was incredibly dystopian. We'll talk about some related things about that later on. Michael.
Now, I just watched the Trump video of his trading cards, and it absolutely is beyond parody. It sounds very, very close to somebody doing a Trump parody. I would certainly recommend it.
Just send me $99 and shut up.
Yeah. You know, I think what we're seeing is just the beginning of how tough it's going to get when the House majority takes over as the Republicans with no real agenda other than vindictiveness. I mean, they ran on own the libs, a lib being defined as anybody to the left of, I don't know, the old thing was Attila the Hun, right? And so even conservatives are not conservative enough. And we're going to see the vindictiveness and the theatrics. Last night, you know, Colbert on the Late Show did what the evening news should do, which is they showed DeSantis talking about how, you know, he's going to do a grand jury right on the vaccine makers, and they showed all the clips of him telling people, get the vaccine, this saves your life, get the vaccine, this saves your life. And unfortunately, the communication elements owned by the right wing don't do that. The other thing is you start looking at the Wall Street Journal, which is supposed to be more quote unquote sane than Fox News, and they do the same thing, but they do it in a more subdued way that gives it credibility, right? And so they talk about how the liberals are attacking freedom of speech without any mention of book banning in Texas and website banning, right? I mean, I've always wanted to see why someone doesn't ask the Freedom Caucus why they don't join the American Civil Liberties Union. Aren't they in favor of freedom? Right. And unfortunately, you know, Rosemarie, when you talk about what this does to women, yeah, that's true, except for the fact that we have, you know, the woman justice on the Supreme Court who led this overturn, and the women who were at the forefront of the, you know, right to life movement and all the rest. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the groundswell against some of this that we wish. And I personally, you know, moving past abortion or gun rights simply to the vaccine science, why the physicians in the red states don't stand up and say, look, you know, I've got my NRA membership card and my right to life membership card, but this is science, and the boundary around this does not include politics. And that hasn't happened. And it's just scary that things that are pure science, and like, you know, saving lives, we've seen the data that show that people are dying more in the red states than in the blue states. It's just scary. Well, this is the good times.
I will say there was a groundswell in Kansas when that was
right, but
I mean, there's not no, you know, there's activity.
No, I know this. It's not no, and yet the degree to which we would wish it to happen in terms of the number of women. I mean, you know, these men who are vocal, most of them are married. I don't see Lysistrata type resistance happening here. For those of you who get the reference, and you know, that would help. Let's have the women organize that. That should
I've heard some women talking about that, to be honest. So stay tuned.
Who is Lysistrata? Because I don't know.
Right. It is, if I remember this right, and please correct me, it is a Greek fable where the women withhold sex in order to get their way.
Oh, that one. Sorry. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, most married men wouldn't know.
No, you're part of
all right. Let's.
Means you're married, so you won't notice. Go ahead.
Exactly. That's the problem. All right, fantastic. Okay. Let's go to Jen.
So, I mean, I think tying a few things together from what Michael and what Rosemarie said, and, you know, Kim, I think you started it off in terms of, you know, a little bit of stupidity, unfortunately, as well. But I mean, I think with the change in Congress, we're hearing lots of noises that the public health emergency is essentially going to be curtailed. We know that the impact that will have on reimbursement for different types of healthcare provision that I think have become fundamental, not only during the pandemic, but just fundamental period. But at the same time that we are going to need to be able to be good advocates for maintaining some of these new services that allow people to access high quality healthcare. You know, we saw the terrible reporting this week on just the absolute stupidity around how we're using and how we are sharing patient data through telehealth sites. And I hope we have the chance to get into this today, Matthew, but I don't even think that there's this, it's nefarious. I think it's just sheer stupidity. And it's frustrating to see that happening, given that right at the beginning of the year, I think it was like February, Wired ran a big paper and there were sort of, patient hackers who had reported the sort of Metapixel issue. There was the storm of that, only on December 1st, HHS, the Office for Civil Rights, clarified what it means to handle patient data in sort of different tech platforms. And then December 12th, 13th, this reporting comes out, and we can't get out of our own way sometimes. And I think especially as we're going to have to be making a stronger case for sustaining reimbursement for this kind of care, we can't make mistakes like this. There's a patient at the end of every single data point. We need to get better with privacy. And just the idea that there are so many people who have paid absolutely zero attention to what we've been talking about for the course of the last 9 months and didn't think to check their systems is just absolutely ridiculous.
So,
I'm sorry, did you tell your members to check for this and they didn't do it? Is that what you're saying, Jen?
I am incredibly proud that no one in our virtual first community was on that list. I think
okay.
It speaks to a level of it, and I'll tell you what, I didn't look at that list, but I mean, I think it speaks to a level of intentionality, right? Which is and look, what I don't want to do is throw stones at people who were, because I genuinely believe that there's someone who was in a marketing department and didn't realize what that data was, and you're doing sort of direct to consumer advertising, and there isn't enough education out there right now. There aren't enough, we're moving very quickly. We are thinking about trying to connect patients with the care that they need. And we don't have enough layers in our Swiss cheese model right now. Like I may be proven wrong, but I really don't think any of this was done with bad intent. But we've got to, I think as an industry now, we have to put a line in the sand and say that, ignorance is no longer a defense on this kind of thing. We've seen enough. This is really important. This is sensitive data. And Rosemarie, back to your point about what can happen when this sensitive data leaks, some of the implications of this, people's mental health data, like absolutely not. This shouldn't even be a conversation.
Absolutely. So let me just for people listening who aren't quite far deep into this as Jen is, this is the stat article from yesterday done with the markup, and they actually kind of stole this from the Light Collective, although they felt
that's right, Andrea.
Which there's a little bit of sort of who came up with this first, and from Eric Costello too, but doesn't really matter about the source yet. But what's going on here is that now hospitals have all been found to be delivering data back to Facebook. Again, probably a fair amount of ignorance going on there, but some significant fines happened for privacy violation. I hear that Mass General was fined 18 million for privacy violations and something similar. Now 50 telehealth companies were found to have done something in terms of transmitting data back. As you might expect, Cerebral was the one busted for doing the most transferring, most data to most different, people like YouTube and Pinterest and everyone else. But I mean, a company I use, Brightline, is on the list. I did have an exchange with the CEO and said, what was going on. She said, we had stopped this several months ago, but it was, I think the research was done in September, October, but some of the companies were still doing it as recently as like last week. So yes, it may be absolute stupidity, and it sounds like the gain to be, the value to be gained of doing that data transfer back to those big tech transfer advertising is so minimal compared to the harm, you're going to do to yourself when it gets found out for your reputational risk, that I suspect there's a lot of that going on, but we got to see. And yeah, it's not the first time that companies have been, digital health companies have been accused of being fast and loose with people's data, and it probably won't be the last, but this is one is particularly just a few days after the HHS. In fact, Devon was on last week telling us what the hell this was all about. And Clearly not all 50 companies were listening to the show. Anyway, all right, we'll get back to this one. Let's move on. Let's make sure that I get Saurabh and Lygeia to get a chance to tell us what they've been up to. Saurabh, tell us, presumably you were just with me in mourning on Saturday after Harry Kane missed the second penalty, but
yeah,
maybe not.
Even when it doesn't go to penalties, England loses on penalties. It's quite an art to be able to do that.
Never mind.
Yeah, so these days I don't really go to the comedy club to get comedy. I just look for serious people and see what they say, and that gives you plenty of comedy. So generally what's been going on Twitter is just another comedic exaggeration of COVID. We have reports from the New York Times, a little article that said that COVID can be spread from corpses. So in case you're wondering how the zombie apocalypse came about, it was through a respiratory virus. Even though they're dead, they can still breathe those viruses at you. There was another study that sunk to the bottom of idiocy, which showed that vaccinated people are less likely to get into accidents than unvaccinated people. And so the sort of politicized, utter crap that comes out of the medical mainstream media that really should be just culled because it doesn't help anybody. And they came with a startling conclusion that maybe doctors should start telling unvaccinated people to stop at stop signs. Maybe they should also tell unvaccinated people to put condoms on, because you never know what other associations one might find. But the real depth of stupidity in this genre, I mean, the utter Mariana Trench of subprime stupidity, came from none other than Alex Berenson, who, commentating on the unfortunate death of Grant Wall, the soccer reporter from Qatar, who was in Qatar, who died of what is now known to be a ruptured aneurysm, postulated, or more than postulated, said with some degree of certainty, that this is from giant cell arteritis as a complication of the vaccine, COVID vaccine, leading to rupture of the aorta. So I think the country as a whole has become obsessed with this virus and the vaccination to a degree that is unparalleled in history. There is no other country as obsessed with either the virus or the vaccine as this country is. Most countries have gotten, they've suffered, they've gotten along with it. They're like, life has to go on. They're not harping up and down about long COVID and exaggerating it. And they're taking vaccinations. That's how India got rid of polio. They're not one harping up and down about civil liberties and myocarditis and all that. There is some pathology that is unified. And I know people don't like it because they believe that their side is more sane than the other side. But as an outside observer, which I think you are as well, Matthew, although you've been here a bit longer than I have, this is just a metastatic insanity that this country is suffering. One half is obsessed about COVID, and the other half is obsessed about the vaccination against COVID. And it's hard for me to decide which is saner. It's a tough call.
Some pathology. Well, I will blame Jen. Jen has been here the most recent of all of us, so she can tell us how crazy Americans are compared to everyone else. Although it has to be said, the Brits are running the Americans pretty well on their own pathology, which is this wider thing about Brexit, which is going pretty crazy there too. All right, Lygeia, welcome back. It's been a long time since we had you on, and you're going to tell us now what I can see your product behind you. About shipping out for Christmas. Are you like Shark Tank? You're like doing it from your own kitchen table.
At the moment, I pretty much am. And I didn't actually plan for that to be in the screen, but that's reality. I am packing a ton of these self-care boxes to send out to people. And so what I am focused on in terms of kind of health topics is general well-being. And in particular, I've been thinking a lot about the ongoing impact of COVID. I feel like in a lot of ways, it feels like there are some real changes, palpable changes that I've experienced in my own life. For example, I was in New York. I live in Washington, D.C., but I went up to New York last week. I hadn't been there for a couple months. And I just felt like there was a level of bustle, and it felt like people were getting along with their lives. It was almost impossible to book a restaurant. There were these COVID stations where you could do testing on every corner. It actually felt like a pretty healthy response, I thought. But an unhealthy piece that, again, plays into the work I'm doing is the kind of mental health impact and then ongoing impact that it's having. And I do feel like a lot of folks are really struggling. I know we've probably all seen data, and I've talked about it here in the past about particularly kids who've struggled, not so much from the disease itself, but the aftermath of quarantine. And it's not just that they were like shut away for a year and a half or more. And you would think like, oh, great, they're going back to school, it's all good. But it's more that they're having this kind of mental health impact that has come and sort of boomeranged. I mean, I live in downtown DC. I have a kid in private school, a kid in public school. And just the mental health level of like trauma, drama, overwhelm here is really high. Like part of the problem is there aren't enough, teachers in school handling people. There aren't enough like therapists supporting people, but like programs for mental health. There are a lot of kids who've really struggled. And that I see as a huge ongoing problem, even beyond sort of the extent to which we're still spreading the disease and it's still having physical impact. It's having mental impact in ways that I'm sure will go on for a long time. So that's at the forefront of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think that the other thing no one's mentioned yet, but of course the biggest change in COVID in the last couple of weeks has not been in this country. It's been in a place where they decided they weren't going to have COVID, and now they've given up. So they are giving up, and the Chinese are going to. And I don't know what I have a friend who was in Shanghai, happened to be from a Western nation. She was working actually in healthcare in Shanghai. She had a very interesting tale, especially of in order to get out, she had to go to jail, but that's a separate issue because she was working in the wrong part and on the wrong visa status, and there was some weird reclamations for that. But she and her husband spent, I believe, 3 months essentially locked up together. And I think if that happened in my house, I would be dead because everyone else would have killed. Somebody would have killed me. And the reason we have gun control in my house is so that my daughter and my son don't use it to kill their parents, because obviously that would happen at any stage. But you can imagine, how tough lockdown was for people in America, where in general you could leave the house and there was no restrictions. Then you go to somewhere like Australia, where you could only get an hour a day, and they were tough for several months. And then you think about somewhere like Shanghai, where they literally did not let anybody out of the apartment building. In fact, you couldn't socialize. They delivered food to you if you were lucky. Sometimes not enough. You had to make do with what the hell you had in your fridge. The sort of collective trauma that's going to think about that for millions and millions of Chinese people is going to be, I don't think it's going to come out, or it's going to come out enough to actually upset the apple cart in the politics of China. Who knows? But anyway, but yeah, I think we have to work on all that. Let's go back to the issue though that Jen raised, which is the one about and there's a lot of stuff to talk about, I know, this week, but the one about telehealth companies, transmitting data. We talked a little bit about this last week in the context when I had Devin on explaining, that where OCR was on this. She said right now this is like a warning post for you to get back on the right side. I should use the World Cup terminology. This is to get, you have a chance to get back on side, and the referee won't blow the whistle quite yet. But I'm wondering how soon.
Matthew, tell people what OCR is, since that's not.
It's the Office of Civil Rights. Thank you. It's the Office of Civil Rights.
I know that.
Yeah. So Devin McGraw, who's now obviously now in Vitae and Citizen, used to run it back in the day when when there was an administration who used to work for Lygeia. But the base thing is they issued a ruling saying, don't do anything stupid and intransparent by allowing visitors to your website to have their information communicated to another website without them knowing it, or else we will come after you. In response to the fact that hospitals have been broadly doing this across America. This is before, it was kind of known that some of the digital health companies have been, in fact, there was the original paper in Cell, Mary Pascalis had Invitae on it, so Devin's company itself wasn't perfect, even though they were just doing she just released a report, which I think was, again, as Jen says, probably an accident, given she was releasing a report, talked about last week about a report about the level of transparently what they are doing with de-identified data, let alone identified data. But when you have, the case that you now have 50 companies, some of which have been very well funded and, well known in the digital health space, not all of them, but, including public companies on there like Talkspace and others, sending data to Facebook, sending data to Facebook and Google and who knows whom else. I'm wondering if the HHS, OCR, and even the FTC, well, actually, HHS doesn't regulate many of these companies because many of them are not HIPAA regulated. Lygeia nodding as though she understands the law better than I do. We should get Devin back on. But on the other hand, you got to think somewhere, somehow, someone's got to start making an example, right? And whether it's to say, blow them. Well, in soccer, you can run offside and then come back onside without them blowing the whistle. But at some point, they do that video review, especially if a goal scored or whatever. And at some point, I think we've got to have the consequences for the video review. So penalty to England. So I wouldn't know. But, Jen, what's your sense about how close we are to that line and what these companies, need to do to clear their names if they have been, innocent victims of screw up by junior marketing people or whatever you want to call it?
Well, I mean, you mentioned some of the fines that have been levied against healthcare systems, and given the wafer thin margins that healthcare systems run on, even the biggest and the best of them, those aren't insignificant amounts of money. And I also think, especially for the more direct to consumer, you only have a business if you have trust. And I think there's a really good example outside of the healthcare sphere around where this has gone horribly wrong, right? You only need to look at Juul, and you can sort of think what you want about them as a company, but ostensibly, if you talk to them, what they were trying to do was they were trying to sort of promote smoking cessation. And then they had a marketing team that does what marketing teams does, which was try and maximize their market cap, and they ended up advertising to kids. And so, look at where they are now. And you just sort of say, we've seen this movie before. We have to be able to differentiate between what is sensitive health information that we have to protect at all costs, because the purpose of our industry is to care for people. And then what is the data that we can use? What are the systems and platforms that we can interact with, and how, in order to make sure that care that we can provide can reach as many people as possible? And we just have to think about it more intentionally. And, I don't know what the sort of, Matthew, to your point, what is the penalty here? What is the punitive measure? But we haven't seen small fines. There has been action. There has been, the healthcare systems have been held to account. But what is it going to take in order to equip these new sort of providers with sufficient resources and education and incentive to actually do this properly? I'm not sure I know the answer, because I would have thought that the conversation over the last 8 months would have been enough.
Michael, go, dive in.
So I want to take a step further. And I think first of all, what Jen said is absolutely on target. I mean, she's saying, look, we know how this movie ends, and our industry is becoming mainstream, and we have to adhere to mainstream standards voluntarily before something bad is done to us. And hopefully she will be listened to. But I want to take it a step further. I've written since 2018 about secret analytics being used by health plans and health systems, that they take consumer data, so-called consumer data, where you shop, what you have on Facebook, marriage and divorce records, credit reports, all sorts of things, identify, put them into algorithms and sell the information. Companies do this and sell the information to health plans, hospitals, and who knows who else, because consumer data, even if it's related to health, is not protected by HIPAA. And then it's used for outreach for social determinants of health and who knows what else. Well, when this kind of stuff that we're talking about here goes to Facebook and places like that, it is now unprotected, right? And therefore it's scooped up by the algorithms. So we have no idea what identified data is now being used as part of these larger algorithms by non-HIPAA protected companies, and given to whom. And it all goes to the fact that the divisions between what's medical, what's non-medical, right? We were talking about the abortion. Okay, so you go out and you buy certain supplies, right, that are indicative of your health status, right? And we all heard about, years ago, the analogy was that, a husband found out his wife was pregnant when the little coupon came from Walmart that had been doing AI and saw that you were shopping for diapers, right?
Let's place blame where that's true. That was from Target, but same concept.
So in other words, they were
that, which is probably even worse than
they were right on target. So so now we're seeing all this kind of data scooped up where we want to do lifestyle, we want to do wellness, as Lygeia said. So all of a sudden we have data that we didn't think anybody was taking. We have data that nobody should be taking, and we're scooping that all together. And it is a dangerous mixture. And I would agree with Jen. I think it's going to blow up. I think that someone's going to put together all these different things, and we're going to see the degree to which, particularly healthcare that we think of as the good guys, are not always, the good guys. And it's a shame.
Actually, that's an interesting comment. You spoke about the pregnant, how you knew about the pregnancy. So Walmart did a study using AI. Matthew, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And they looked at what people bought just before hurricanes. Guess what they bought? 2 items were bestsellers.
Toilet paper.
That wood stuff that you put up against your windows, and then
I think so, wouldn't you?
Right?
Flashlights, right? And stuff like that.
Flashlights, yes, of course.
Beer and Pop-Tarts. I get beer, but I just don't get Pop-Tarts.
I get Pop-Tarts.
That's
Nutrition.
It's good forever.
Okay. So it's the sort of thing you go underground if there's a nuclear war.
Army, meals ready to eat from the army that you can sit there for 10 years. Can you eat Pop-Tarts cold?
Oh yeah.
I must have been done frequently. Oh, well.
And they come in individual foil wrap packages, so if things get wet, they'll be protected.
So
I'm going to defend Team England on this one because Pop-Tarts aren't just really a thing.
Well, they're not really a thing in England, but
exactly. And so I feel like there's a rationale behind the naivety that you can indeed enjoy a Pop-Tart at any temperature, at any time, after any period of time.
I don't know, Jen. I'd say with three of us immigrants on English immigrants on the phone on the gang today, which I don't know how the hell that happened in the first place. Number one, but it's a little bit dangerous given the amount of weird foibles that happen in our home nation. So that's we're vulnerable to a reverse attack on that one. Start talking about black pudding and spotted dick and God knows what else, warm beer.
So back to the privacy thing for a second. So I don't know whether it's amusing or disconcerting, but Facebook has been notoriously terrible with privacy for a long time, and people are in fact fleeing Facebook. But where they're fleeing to is TikTok, which is an order of magnitude worse. So I don't know that it's clear that people are still really valuing their privacy very much.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, right? Is that it's been, I think I want Harris, when I was at Institute for the Future, so back in the day, Michael knew me back then, Institute for the Future ran a poll with Harris. I can't remember if Harris ran the poll, we were working with Harris. How it happened, I don't know. But at that point, Americans would say, when you surveyed them, would you hand over would you be appalled? And hand over my name and address, and in those days, written the form and, go to a database, shocking, appalling. Would you do it for a t-shirt? Everyone says yes. You could. So the bribe was $2.50, whatever it cost them to build it, make it mass-produced T-shirt. So I think people don't think about it. But if you look at the results, and I've got them up, which I might just share my screen for 1 second because it's so incredible. If you look at the results, this is the only company which didn't send anything to any others was Amazon, because they understand data and B didn't want to join in. But if you look at some of them like Calibrate. This is actually, this little symbol here, Cerebral and Calibrate, both send answers to questionnaires to Facebook. So, you're answering very sensitive information if you're Cerebral or Calibrate. Cove, this is about, I think Cove is the one about, is that the hair loss one from 30 Madison? So, not good. And a lot of stuff like, when did the user initiate checkout? Do we send personal info? If you go back up to the top, I believe there's a chart here. Full name, email, phone, 35 out of 50 sites sent that. We're not talking accidental. Maybe it's accidental and involuntary on behalf of the company and the marketing person was doing something wrong, but we're not talking a trivial amount of them sending identifiable personal data. We're talking almost all of them sending identifiable personal data back to somebody. So, it's the cat's out of the barn. And I think people are understanding it. Do they care, Kim? Yeah, maybe. And frankly, I'm guilty as hell because the fact that I have been very public about the fact that my daughter has ADHD and she is been working with Bright Line actually, and very successfully. So all well and good, but I'm not sure I would want them telling, that's okay for me to tell people about it. Whether my daughter thinks that's okay in 10 years' time is another matter. Should have shot me by then, probably. But is it okay for someone we're working with to tell Facebook? No, it's just not okay. So that's I'm with you anyway.
I have to jump in and say, I've looked at this data for a lot of years and seen that people will give up their private information for like literally nothing. On the other hand, I don't think it's necessarily that people don't care so much as that it's such a sort of imprecise threat of like, I'm not sure exactly how this could come back to haunt me or hit me later. And frankly, it feels like there's not really a good choice other than sharing most of your stuff most of the time. I do care somewhat about privacy, but I'm also not going to like forgo social media and everything else. Like, I feel like maybe, as you said, the cat is out of the barn or whoever's out of the barn. Like things are so far gone with the amount of data that we're spilling and the digital trails that we're leaving every day that as a consumer, it's almost like, I give up. Like, what are your choices to protect?
You cannot manage this as a consumer, right? You have
but as Rosemarie said, the abortion thing is going to make this very real to a lot of people very quickly.
Yeah,
that is true.
Absolutely. And it's one thing to think that you're going to get a targeted ad. People are not giving up, their mental health questionnaire going to Facebook. They didn't know what was happening, right? I mean, so do people care about privacy? Well, maybe they don't care about having my email and my phone number because I know that you can grab that anyway off the web, but I sure care about my medical questionnaire. And people presumed, if you read the article, that it was protected information. Right. And so that's why it made such a splash, is it's going beyond like, yeah, I know that they're going to grab this stuff too. Wait a second, they're grabbing that as well. And so that's why I think, Jen was on target about how this can blow up. And it's particularly, again, not just the telehealth, but hospitals and people like that. I mean, the telehealth startups, you can blame it on some marketer, but when you're a multi-billion-dollar health system, even if it is coming from some marketer in the whatever, you have no excuse because you're supposed to know better. And
well, I think you're also being a bit kind to the digital first companies, because two things. One is they should know this stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
The second is, many of them are delivering care, right? They have doctors and clinicians who are licensed, who are doing care delivery. Just because it's online doesn't mean they shouldn't be up, And I don't know the exact law and where does the buck stop with HIPAA and, that kind of stuff between the company and the affiliated doctors who may be contractors or maybe in a separate professional corporation or what have you. But, I think this is.
Well, it's pretty clear that HIPAA is inadequate. Like, sure. We've known this for years, but we don't have a good plan in place or a roadmap even to get to some sort of a policy framework, which is what I think we need to do to help people, because there's not a heck of a lot you can do as an individual consumer. And we do need broader, I think we need to sort of escalate this issue, I guess, in Congress, but there isn't like an agency that the FTC has some sort of a role here. Obviously, OCR has roles over pieces of it, but it's too fragmented. And without totally blaming, I mean, I do think there are a lot of folks in big tech. I've spoken to a lot of them. They're honestly trying to do the right thing, but it's so complicated and hard to navigate. They need more kind of guidelines and requirements, in my opinion, that has to come at kind of a policy level.
I liked in the article how many of the websites bragged about being HIPAA compliant. And it's a Princess Bride moment, like, that word, you keep using it, but I do not think you know what it means.
Exactly.
What do you think it means? So I think, and we'll probably have to get off this topic unless we spend the rest of the show on it, which I guess we could do. But, it's also worth noting that there are two, the wider world of this stuff is two big things are happening, right? So number one is, Kim mentioned TikTok, right? Pretty clear that the Chinese, that there is a dotted line between the people who run TikTok and the Chinese Communist Party, and that people can move the algorithm around and start moving people around on that in a way that we know has been done, because we saw it being done in 2016, both in the Brexit thing and clearly, with less skill or less easily available tools that drive into the brain of every teenager and by the way, more than teenager in America, on TikTok has been happening. An incredibly successful growth rate of TikTok. And by the way, knockoffs that, Facebook and YouTube, these short videos, they're very, very, even I get addicted to it by seeing members of my family blowing through this stuff, number one. And then, the second thing is everyone else's, our favorite social network, which I think Saurabh mentioned earlier, has been taken over by a guy who used to be, the savior of Western and world civilization by creating rockets taking us to Mars and electric cars and batteries, and now has gone completely full MAGA gaga, with Twitter. And we're now releasing, he's now releasing the old regime's internal stuff about, their banning. And a lot of us who've written DMs to each other on Twitter are probably pretty worried about what the hell we said, in that. And I wouldn't like my DMs to other people released, and God knows what's going on there. So this sort of stuff this cannot go, it's like, as Jen says, it cannot go on. People are cleaning up, whether it's just around this one issue or whether we have bigger legislation. But as I forget who said this, was it you, Michael? We've got a new Congress with can't even figure out who they want to have speaker because Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't like Kevin McCarthy.
Well, she does support him. She actually supports him.
She supports him. Who doesn't like it? Who are the mystical people who won't vote for him then?
Andy Biggs and that group, the Freedom Caucus.
There are a bunch of people crazier than Marjorie Taylor Greene, is what you're trying to tell me.
Well, no, but they're crazy in a different way.
Crazy.
He's bribed her in the right way already. He hasn't found the
they're not.
Okay, but the point is, they're not going to be, Michael's point is, they're not going to be passing sensible, intellectually crafted legislation in the next 2 years. And yet they're in charge now, right? They're in charge of the House at least. So we can't expect legislation. Maybe stuff as Lygeia said can come around.
And remember, by the Constitution, all revenue bills have to originate in the House.
Well,
so,
yeah.
And then the Queen has to sign it, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure.
There is no Queen anymore.
The king, excuse me.
Fans in Qatar are singing "God Save the King," not "God Save the Queen."
God Save the King. Yes.
Still the worst national anthem of ever. That one compared to the French, where it's fantastic tune, and they're watering the streets with the blood of their enemies by the end of it. That's how you should sing a national anthem. Anyway.
All revenue bills originate in the House, and that's a pretty big cudgel.
But what I feel like we've almost done during our conversation is sort of lay out a spectrum of things that we appreciate and things that we don't, right? And so, Saurabh, you were talking about how there's this just ridiculous sort of mis and disinformation that's happening and how this absolute nonsense is spreading like wildfire, right? And then we're thinking about, well, how do we change sort of practices and behaviors? And I almost think about sort of connecting a circle here, which is, Lygeia, to your point, are we going to get this sort of, data rights to human rights sort of legislation in the next few years? Probably not. So then what can we do? We can actually think about the way, we've all been sort of decrying, how we're using the data, how are we using the algorithms? We could look at the power of the way that people do spread things like misinformation and disinformation. And how do we actually look at that playbook a little bit and say, how do we use the ability to communicate and to change behaviors in this way, in a way that's actually positive? Right? There's another side to every coin here, and in the way in which we pick up spurious data and we try and drive behaviors that we don't appreciate, we can repurpose all of that.
So I'm gonna love that.
Saurabh, then Lygeia, sorry.
I was just going to say, I love that point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Saurabh, you go first. Lygeia next.
No, I think. I just want to make a brief point. Historically, the public square, being the electronic space, obviously is unprecedented. There's never been a time in history where so many people have voiced so many opinions, and where, Diogenes actually had to work hard to get his point across. Nobody retweeted him. He had to go to people individually. So I think this is a very abnormal situation. And we're seeing, in the beginning, all of us saw the positive elements of Twitter. It's through Twitter that I got to know people that I would not have otherwise. So yes, it did scale, but then you also see the negative element of it. And I'm not sure that you can separate the two neatly. I think they're part of the same process, and it's an abnormal process, actually. So many people shouldn't really be having a say. That's never been how history has been. History has always been self-curated. If Galileo had been around Twitter, nobody would have listened to him, not because he had a point, but because there would have been so many other Galileos who would have thought they'd have a point. It would have drowned out the real Galileos, and that's really the issue we have. So I'm saying as somebody who is a for Galileo, a pretentious Galileo, not a real one.
Well, that point's super interesting, right? Because it's back to the scientific method that we've, in retrospect, decided was how Galileo, won. There was a lot of political posturing between him and the church as to who was right, when most people didn't, even their rarefied people who cared about this stuff back in the 16th century was it the 17th century? Didn't have a clue as to what was going on. But there's a lot of argument and all the rest of it. All right, Lygeia, then Michael.
So, Jennifer, I love your idea of how can we take these sort of effective modes of spreading disinformation and flip them without being overly negative, because I've totally had that thought too. Number one, that depends a little bit on the support from the algorithm, right? Like, you can be terrific, but if the algorithm isn't like lined up to support you, doesn't matter, your messages don't go anywhere. Second point, though, too, unfortunately, is that the way we are wired behaviorally is to respond more intensely to fear than to positivity, which is why there's so much crappy, negative, awful news. In addition to the fact that there is a lot of crappy, negative, awful stuff in the world, but it's what gets a rise and gets a retweet, frankly, or a TikTok share, whatever. So those are challenges, and I'm not sure how to balance that with what you're talking about. Again, I love the idea of it, and I'd like to push us further to sort of use the tools that we've seen be effective for good.
Well, and Michael, I know you want to jump in, but what's the other big thing that everyone's been chatting about this week, chat being the operative word that we haven't touched on. What is it? Is it chat GPT or whatever it is? And so, Lygeia, I think you're right to be skeptical, and we should always be skeptical, but I don't, and I know that you're not suggesting that we are, but we shouldn't throw in the towel, right? Let's think about it. What is it that and Twitter's full of it. It's the mock outrage. It's all of this kind of, thing that you see all the time that gets the pickup. Even, I can't remember who was saying it about, the Wall Street Journal wrote a disappointing article, and it's, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, because they got to sell clicks just like everyone else does. But I think it's a lot more about how do we position some of these issues, and how do we actually use our ability to surface information in a way that, without becoming, forcing information and facts down people's throats, right? I've got to believe that there's a pathway, I think is what I'm saying. And I think it's right to be skeptical. And is it going to be hard? And Mike, after you, I'd actually love to hear from Rosemarie a little bit about how you're thinking about this in the context of sort of protecting women going forwards, because I think there's an opportunity to use this as a really important test case to drive a heart into, or to drive right to the heart of so many of the things that we've been chatting about today.
So let me reinforce the pessimism with a little and a sliver of optimism. The reason we're different than other countries is it is profitable to put out the misinformation. And it is something that is, in a sense, unprecedented. The people who have been vaccinated put out anti-vax propaganda on Fox News from Trump when he was president and elsewhere. And so there is profit. Yes, because negative news sells, but simply, and then the people they're communicating to do not have alternative methods of information. I mean, the one thing that Trump did that was brilliant was with the fake news, you can't trust anybody else, the big lie. So you discredit, and that's why the fake news thing has been picked up by, Latin American dictators, by right-wing politicians, literally throughout the world, in Israel and France, everywhere. You discredit the other sources of information, and then the only sources of information you trust come from people who are peddling misinformation, some of which they believe, some of which they don't, for profit. And you've shut out the others. So you can have all the editorials you want and all the things about reasonableness, but none of those are being run in the Wall Street Journal, which is relatively, people from all sides reads. And certainly, the New York Times runs opposite viewpoints, the Post. You don't see that on Fox News. And so you have, people like friends of ours, both who have, graduate degrees and worked in healthcare. Fauci calls the epidemic, right? And so the kind of reasonableness we want to do, the scary thing is being shut out for profit. And you see mainstream people. I just saw the other day that with Simon & Schuster is publishing a book about the way ivermectin, is that how it's pronounced? was suppressed. Something that's already been scientifically shown doesn't work. A major book publisher is putting out a book that'll then get all the thing about why that was really suppressed and why it really was the elites doing it. And it's just really, really scary, because it's been a very effective propaganda campaign. And now the small slice of optimism, sort of. When Lygeia talks about what kind of regulation, everything we need, the good news is this is a Republican Party that operates on getting even with enemies. That's simply what they believe in, getting even with enemies. And the tech companies can be seen as enemies. Isn't that great? And so we may actually get bipartisan legislation for privacy, with one group of people doing it because they're good government types and the other group of people doing it because they're vindictive, but it could give us bipartisan legislation. And I certainly hope that bipartisan coalition turns to Lygeia to help write the legislation.
Wow. I love that. That's almost like Machiavellian. I don't know. That's
it is.
That's quite something, Michael. Jennifer, thanks for calling. I think it's premature for me to have like a fully formed thought on like where this is all going, because it just kind of came to my attention this week, but I'm always looking for ways in which we can activate more people politically. I do want that groundswell of women and their allies. And I think when you get straight to things that are, part of their daily lives in a way that they thought was helpful and benign, and it turns into something, it's a reminder of like our basic rights and freedoms that should not be taken away from us. And so I do think that could be politically activating. And that's where I would want to go with this more, because I'm not a digital health expert, but as I look at like, how is your daily life going to change? And then what can we do with that?
All right. So we don't have a lot of time left, and not to start a whole new topic, but so I want to go around and give everyone a sort of chance to speak before this before we go in 7 minutes. So let me just go around the horn about what have we not talked about this week that we're going to be talking about over the next week or two. And I will start with why don't I start with you, Kim?
Well, with the holidays coming up and people doing a lot of social things, we have to be watching to see what that's going to mean for COVID and RSV and flu spread. I mean, it's already at crisis levels, and it's going to get more people are going to get exposed, and how much worse can the health system absorb before it just crashes? I'm really worried about the next month or two about how bad things are going to get.
I literally just looked at a WhatsApp message from a group I'm in that has a bunch of people in China, sort of old English and American expats, and one of them, the guy living in Beijing, says he thinks there are 65% of people in Beijing are infected, around 17 million. His quote is, "Health system hasn't collapsed quite yet." Anyway, Michael.
Well, Santa Claus will come early because this is when the Congress has to pass a continuing budget resolution. And so we shall see before the Christmas recess, first of all, how long they extend the budget until. And second of all, what goodies are thrown in at the last moment, unread or unpaid attention to into the bill that's a must-pass bill. So we will get a budget for whatever period we get it in a continuing resolution. And what will Santa Claus bring to all the different Congress people that they throw in order to get their vote?
Yeah, and just on that point, was it last year or the year before, or 2 years ago, they threw in the thing that Brian Clapper, who's occasionally on the show, always talks about, which is the ability to sue this hasn't come up at all in this conversation, but it's been an active plug this week, is that there's a couple of court cases going on where unions or employers are suing Anthem for not giving them their data about spending that Anthem has been doing as an ASO, as a third-party administrator, with their money to providers. And there's been a lot of question about, including and there's a spectacular one in New Jersey where the state, Blue Cross in New Jersey, on behalf of the state, spent $2 million on a case in a New York hospital for which they'd originally been billed $600,000, and no one quite knows where the extra $1.3 million that one case went. And there's a lot of this going on. Cigna's involved in a dispute. Anthem's involved. There's a lot of lawsuits going on. I think that to me, who knows what will be shoved into that legislation, but you can tell that stuff that has big impact, gets put in there in the middle of the night. No one knows where it comes from. And sometimes lobbyists are getting it in, and sometimes lobbyists are failing to get it out, as the AHIP folk clearly did that this time. So I think you did right to point that out, Michael. Saurabh, what do you think we'll be checking out the next couple of weeks?
Well, it's soon going to be the new year, so I can give you my whole wish list. I was just at the RSNA, the radiology meeting in Chicago, and the masks came off, and I got an infection. And for 3 years, I didn't experience man flu, but I realized that it was something I didn't quite miss. I don't think that the hospitals are going to get overwhelmed during the holiday season. At least I don't think that the ones that I'm with are going to get overwhelmed. I do hope that in 2023 we get over COVID and not obsessed with it. I hope that there is a bipartisan commission that looks at the origin of COVID and also how we handled it. And I hope that exonerates Fauci very much. I think there are two thoughts of which people think are contradictory. One is that we do need to investigate and think about how we handled it and where it came from. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing maggish about that. And second, that we have potentially a national hero who's being vilified, and that should, through the proper processes, be taken through, and hopefully he'll be exonerated.
Right, and a lot of that vilification is coming from the guy who now owns our favorite social media site, which is pretty extraordinary considering that's a guy who theoretically believes in science, or at least we hope so. Although if anyone saw the data about the efficacy of Tesla's self-driving technology versus Waymo and Cruise, maybe he doesn't believe in science that much anyway. Well, scales. Lygeia.
A topic we haven't focused on a lot is the economy. And I think that moving into the tail end, I guess, of the Christmas shopping season, it's a big piece in sort of shaping where we're headed and looking at consumer spending, what's going on in the months ahead with inflation and so on, is something to really watch because it plays into all these pieces.
Absolutely. Are you on the side of we're going to get a recession no matter what, or are we going to sort of bump along and survive it?
I hope we bump along and survive it, but I try to be optimistic despite increasingly feeling slightly pessimistic in some ways as I get older and wiser. But at my core, I'm still very much an optimist. Well,
I wish I'd been short of the stock market this year. I'm very fearful about what happens when I don't know when it's going to happen, but whatever the funding behind commercial real estate that's the thing that I'm worried about, because you look around the downtowns, even the ones that are bustling, commercial real estate ain't doing too well. If you look at San Francisco, my God, it's downtown is just empty. So when people come around and say, am I going to fulfill my lease? And then you end up in the cycle of we're not getting the rents we want to get, therefore we can't afford that you can start seeing things that might tumble, even though it looks like, fingers crossed, that whatever the insanity around the crypto FTX stuff hopefully doesn't contage over to real life, but we don't know. Anyway, there's a lot of things that could fall. Anyway, Rosemarie.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were to make it through this whole thing without mentioning crypto, but I'm not going to go there.
Sorry, that was my fault. I apologize.
So I really am looking forward. I'm hoping for a somewhat non-COVID Christmas, but or at least a mitigated COVID Christmas. But I think looking further ahead than that, I would say we didn't really touch on the strain on the provider system and hospitals. And even if there's not a tremendous COVID surge and it's manageable, it's the everything else and the cumulative effect of how weary people are. And we talk about mental health issues. I'm concerned about doctors and nurses and providers in that human level of just there's a shortage, and it's just something that's not going to be solved overnight. So I think we got to spend more time on that in 2023.
Yeah, just worth noting, Kim pointed out to me on Twitter, and I've read half of it. There is an article in the Times, about Ascension, basically, and how they cut staffing to the bone to the point where it looks like the British NHS, which is having a. So are we digging into this with a nurses strike and a lot of stuff going on there around again, back to staffing levels in hospitals being terrible.
I thought you'd appreciate also that they had a $41 billion hedge fund that they run.
I don't see what's wrong with nonprofits having a massive hedge fund. I mean, every university has one. So they do a bit of teaching on the side, they do a bit of healthcare services on the side, and they're real businesses, managing the money. Isn't that what America's all about?
And they're a religious system.
Yeah.
So
I myself have done some work 22 years ago for Ascension. And I kid you not, well, I would use it, I shit you not. Every meeting room is named after a saint, and every meeting starts with a prayer. I don't know if it still does, but it did then. But the hedge fund wasn't quite.
But they're now praying to Adam Smith. I believe that's the difference.
All right. We're running over here. So Jen, you have to take us on.
I mean, it's that time of year where you sort of take stock, isn't it? And I think that for all of the challenges we talk about in healthcare, and those challenges are really real, I think there's things that's worth reminding ourselves of. It was just, I think, earlier this week, although it all runs together at this time of year, what do we see? Sort of early signals that we can, complete nuclear fusion and what that means for sort of a clean energy future in the energy crisis. We have really, really good data on Ebola vaccines, on malaria vaccines. And I just, it's a mess, but healthcare has always been challenging, and trying to do good things for people has always been hard. There have always been challenging political environments. And I just, at our hearts, everyone in healthcare wants to help people. And, we believe in science. And I think that science continues to drive forward. And it's a nice thing to reflect on at this time of year that, we mustn't give up.
I love it. That's the optimism left in Jen. And it remains for me to tell you that, like a good Englishman, I'm sure Saurabh and Jen will be joining this, we have to support France because at least they're not Argentina on Sunday. So we'll see how that goes. Although there's a sneaky part of me that, I like a good English boy growing up in the 80s, I used to hate Diego Maradona, but, in reflection, he was the best. And I'm sure the same thing we thought about Messi, although Kylian Mbappe having not destroyed England, and England managing to destroy themselves by Harry Kane missing a penalty.
Interestingly, France are just slight favourites.
They're slight favourites. Well, the problem is that talking about illness, 3 of their midfield went down with illness so bad they couldn't get out of bed. There's some bug in the camp. Kind of ironic if they lost the World Cup because all their first team has caught a respiratory virus and is all throwing up rather than playing. So that's a medical challenge of its own. But we'll see how that goes. It should be a fascinating game for those who have to get up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday to watch football. It's a bit grim on the West Coast, but we'll get it done. All right, I want to say goodbye to everybody and thank all my guests. You have been watching and listening to Kim Bellard from the wilds of Cincinnati, Rosemarie Day from the Tony streets of Boston, Massachusetts, Michael Millenson from the wild, windy city of Chicago, Lygeia Riccardi from the actually, I've only known you 20 years and I can't pronounce your name. Lygeia Riccardi from the authoritative town of Washington, D.C., Jen Goldsack from some part of the insanity that is Florida, and Saurabh Jha from Philadelphia. You've been watching THCB Gang. I am your host, Matthew Holt from the Healthcare Blog. This was the December the 15th edition. Thank you for watching and or listening later on the podcast, which you can find on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And next week, we'll be back for the last of the year edition, where I try to usually get everyone to come on for the last few minutes, which may work, may not work. December the 22nd, the immediate pre-Christmas edition will hopefully run. So look forward to seeing you and listening and speaking to all of you then. But for now, thank you very much for watching or listening.